The prevailing wisdom about Kevin Smith is that he's never grown as a filmmaker. It's an opinion I've dabbled with in the past despite my soft spot for his work, and Smith himself claims the same thing pretty regularly, self-deprecatingly. But it feels like a gross oversimplification. While it may be true that his visual sensibility hasn't really evolved in the last 30 years, favoring talky films filled with static camera work and simple but punchy editing, Smith's seemingly eternal arrested development is more carefully cultivated myth than fact. After establishing his voice in the 90s, his post-Askewniverse content, ranging from the so-called disaster that was Jersey Girl to the self-released rage statement that was Red State, was filled with formal and narrative exploration that broadened the possibilities of the kinds of films he was capable of making. With the exception of Clerks 2, they were all disappointments, either critically or commercially. But through Kevin Smith's flop years, we see a series of auditions. 5 films that felt like 5 different pitches for the new and improved Kevin Smith that never came to be, all trying to dial in the winning combination of razor-sharp wit that launched his career and the surprisingly sentimental heart that made him stick around. Jersey Girl feels like the elephant in the room, a film so toxic and untouchable that Smith feels the need to slag it off at every possible occasion. But here's the secret. It's fine. Better than you remember it, at least. It's wild to realize that a perfectly decent and sweet little movie essentially became a manufactured disaster sunk by the toxic media cycle that surrounded Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez back in the day. That was it. America was tired of hearing about Bennifer all day, every day, and they took it out on a movie whose greatest flaw was casting Ben Affleck in the kind of role he wasn't quite ready to play yet. It's a surprisingly effective little rom-com with some great performances from George Carlin, Liv Tyler, and the young Raquel Castro. Is it treacly? Yeah, kind of, but it's also kind of profound. A fluffy film that deals with single fatherhood in a way that's surprisingly frank, filled with a few fun and sticky comedic set pieces along the way. This is Kevin Smith's play to be the big studio rom-com guy, though, and for the most part he acquits himself nicely. It definitely proves that you can make a PG-13 version of one of his movies without fundamentally compromising its essence, and the film is saved by, ironically, the same thing it's most derided for: its naked, unironic sentimentality. The surprisingly gentle nature of Jersey Girl shows up in the best moments of every movie Kevin Smith would make after it. It was the key to unlocking the missing part of his voice. And Jersey Girl shows him pouring his heart onto the screen with a sort of vulnerability, earnestness, and emotional availability that wasn't common in the romantic comedies of that era. Smith has always been a softie. Even in his most acerbic 90s mode, he has this grand romanticism to him. His undercurrent of squishy, dopey, aw-shucks sentimentality makes his films more than just Gen X screeches into the howling void, and it only escalated after he got married and had a kid. While Bennifer doomed the film's financial prospects from the start, critics and audiences punished Smith more than Affleck and Lopez. We punished him for that raw vulnerability, for daring to step outside the cynical Gen X box to show us his genuine, honest heart, for deigning to be anything more than the Clerks guy. So, what did he do next? The shadow of the Askewniverse looms large over Kevin Smith's career. When you're defined by something as distinctive as a cinematic universe, it can become nigh on impossible to do anything else. So it only makes sense that Smith veered back into the Askewniverse lane after Jersey Girl. It's what was expected of him. Not only is it him returning to his comfort zone, it's him returning to the very genesis of his career to try to find the building blocks for a path forward. And while Clerks 2 is a pretty effective and affecting sequel, it always feels like the mix is off. Like his heart isn't in the bodiness, like the humor is an overcorrection instead of a return to form. The conversations feel more forced and less frank, not really based on real customer interactions so much as, wouldn't it be funny if X happened scenarios. The jokes amount to the comedy equivalent of a little kid getting into a high-rise elevator and smashing every button, mistaking making jokes involving hot button issues for making commentary on those issues. There are more hits than misses here, but the real fireworks come when, weirdly enough, he turns on the Jersey Girl-flavored introspection and starts deconstructing these characters through the lens of his own maturation and fatherhood. The film comes alive with goofy, sincere joy and relatable pathos when it gets out of its own way and allows its characters to feel like real people with big problems. Is the choreographed musical-style dance sequence set to ABC by the Jackson 5 totally excessive and silly? Absolutely. But does it perfectly sell just how infectious Becky's appeal to Dante is? 100%. In fact, the dramatic arc of the film uses, perhaps overuses, these fascinating and well-edited pop montages to bring character decisions and mental states into clearer focus. Smith may talk like his characters, and he puts on a bit of a youthful show, but there's some sage maturity hiding behind the Star Wars references and donkey shows. For him, Dante and Randall represent a sort of sliding doors scenario where he never left the quick stop, never followed his dreams, never rocked the boat. Clerks 2 sees Smith drifting into middle age, still looking for something that will bring meaning to the mundanity of life. And he uses this opportunity to essentially revisit his old life to discover some unexpected truths. Accept adulthood and the responsibilities therein, make difficult decisions based on what works for you as opposed to what's expected of you, and step into the unknown with the faith that your friends will be there by your side to help you along. It's a shockingly mature way to handle and recontextualize these two slacker Gen X icons, taking their inertia and indecisiveness and examining it with a critical eye that can only come from time and distance. Clerks 2 was a pretty solid success. While it made slightly less than Jersey Girl, it only cost a third of its budget. It was the sort of moderate hit that gave him the latitude to yet again stretch out and try for broad mainstream success. But it was also an omen. Could he ever escape this one slice of New Jersey? The same point of view, the same Jay and Silent Bob? Get the biggest comedy star in the world and put him in a fun, raunchy, R-rated comedy with a hilarious co-star and a catchy, buzzworthy title. Combine that with pretty good reviews and you've got an instant box office hit, right? Well, the failure of Zack and Miri may be an even bigger bellwether for Smith's career trajectory than the failure of Jersey Girl. The film is good, though it definitely feels like it's trying to reach for an Apatow-style movie, but without a lot of the acutely drawn domestic life that tethers those films to reality. And maybe it's not as progressive with its gender politics as it thinks it is, but it's undeniably funny and wholesomely filthy. It sees Smith futzing with the dial again, too, but instead of leaning towards one end of the spectrum of filth and heart, he instead leans hard into both ends, making a movie that's full of big emotions and even bigger shocks. Not exactly a home run, but a solid triple. It had all of the constituent parts of a hit, but somehow it failed to connect with the public at large. Maybe it was the title or the subject matter. People were ready to see Seth Rogen smoke weed and get his life together, but, you know, in traditional ways, like getting a job and marrying the woman he knocks up, not finding true love in the process of making a porno. Maybe it was the fact that it was released on Halloween Day, notably one of the worst days you can open a film, because your target audience is out getting drunk in fun costumes. Regardless, this surefire hit came up somewhat wanting, and caused a lot of heartache and soul-searching for Smith, which got combined with a late-in-life introduction to marijuana by one Mr. Seth Rogen. For those who were Smodcast listeners back in the day, you may remember a particularly raw two-parter entitled The Talking Cure. It's a tough listen, filled with blame on all sides, and it's frank in a way that, had podcasting been more popular in 2008, would have honestly ended his career. I'll let Kevin explain it in his own words.
Trade's right about the movie. The Trade's always talk about your box office prospects. Both trades we got reviewed at the Toronto Film Festival pointed out that the box office prospects were pretty high. There were indicators up the wazoo, dude. It was like, this is it. This is the one. I just hope we do what Forgetting Sarah Marshall did, which I think is doable, which was domestically about 62 million. Like leading up to the release, a lot of people were like, this is going to be our highest grossing movie ever.
Yeah, I don't think they meant by an inch.
They really didn't mean by $1,500.
Yeah, you're about to watch a snail crawl across the finish line and then die inches from it.
2.2 on the opening Friday?
Yeah.
2.2? That's like, I'm like, what? At that point, I immediately get re-stoned because I'm stoning on and off this whole period, that whole week.
Yeah.
And I descend into a haze of a weed cocoon and don't really emerge from it for a couple days.
Seeing this as a turning point, he hung up his auteur jorts, said goodbye to his longtime producing partner Scott Mosier, kicked the Weinstein brothers to the curb, probably for the best considering all of those terrible things Harvey Weinstein did, not to mention the fact that their post-Miramax Weinstein company mishandled the marketing and release of Zack and Miri almost to the point of malpractice, and fell into the sweet, loving arms of big studio money. What could go wrong? Look, I don't want to be that guy who picks on cop-out, but this movie broke me. It's hard to talk about objectively, or as objectively as any film discussion can be beyond a description of the plot and the fact that it's in color and contains spoken dialogue. When you see a Kevin Smith film, you believe you can make a movie. Not because they're poorly made. In fact, I'd argue he's about on par with Steven Soderbergh at getting naturalistic and impactful performances out of non-actors and amateur actors, but what you see on the screen feels like such an effortless translation of vision and voice to film, and with his accessibility and down-to-earth persona, he makes your own ambitions feel within reach. But sadly, none of that exists in Cop-Out. It's an oddly labored effort that lacks any sort of authorial stamp from Smith. I get that the production was troubled. We've heard Kevin's side of the story so many times, and Bruce Willis's recent health revelations have colored that somewhat. But all of that aside, the central issue with the film remains. The screenplay, the first he directed that he didn't write, is horrendously, irretrievably bad. Even if it's true that Willis was constantly throwing out the pages of the script that were funny, the process inadvertently cut the film down to its barest bones, allowing us to see that the skeleton of the story is cliched, racist, and playing its glorified wanton police violence for unironic laughs. For the life of me, I can't find a single funny thing about blackmailing a criminal to get him to help you break into a house, tying a suspect to the back of your car and driving said car to punish him for lack of cooperation, threatening to shoot someone during an interrogation, or any of the countless other wildly horrifying things Willis and Morgan's characters do in this film that's supposedly a fun buddy cop movie. Maybe we weren't having the police violence conversation very loudly in 2010, but Jesus Christ, this movie revels in a disturbingly fascistic idea of cops as infallible and justified extra-legal agents of justice, and the story does absolutely no work in convincing us that either of these guys has anything resembling redeeming, personable qualities. It's well directed from a technical standpoint, but it feels like Smith is making a movie with one hand tied behind his back. Cop-Out is his audition to play Kevin Smith, the big studio comedy guy yet again, but he only brought half of his arsenal to the party. If the studios thought that the problem with his movies was his scripts, they were sorely mistaken. Part of that hamstrung feeling may come from the fact that he's missing Scott Mosier for the first time in his career. They seemed inseparable, but after Zack and Miri fizzled, Mosier went off to Illumination to become an animation director and hasn't produced a single one of his films since. My pet theory is that Mosier was always the angel on Smith's shoulder, with Kevin being the destination-minded guy and Scott being the journey-oriented one. Sometimes you lose details when you're only worried about the end goal, and without somebody watching Kevin's back and helping him fight battles behind and in front of the camera, the movie obviously suffered. That being said, it's still his highest grossing movie to date, but the critical response was brutal. Critics abandoned Smith. Before, his missteps were generally taken as shaky progress towards something greater, but this was something else. Some of that was the film itself, but a lot of it was, sadly, horrific fat phobia around the Too Fat to Fly incident that inexplicably made its way into the reviews because it happened 2 weeks before opening weekend, overshadowing a lot of the conversation about the film itself. This combination of outsized aggression towards both the film and filmmaker on the back of a particularly traumatic production experience led to a complete break for Smith. He dug in his heels and hit back at film critics as a whole, and it burned a lot of bridges for him. So he turned away from the studio gigs, dusted off a particularly out-of-left-field script he wrote that nobody wanted to finance, and got to work on his final audition. Red State is wild. For a guy who dropped out of film school, it feels like the sort of movie you'd make in film school, for better and worse. It's a gutsy move, an abandonment of tone, style, and form, much like Cop-Out, but with a grander sense of drive and intentionality, with all of the zeal, focus, and sharpness you'd expect from Smith at his best. It's some of the most complex and fascinating filmmaking of his career, and shows that he does have a nascent visual imagination lurking underneath the shot-reverse-shot comedies. Not to armchair psychologize too far, but it's also the last film he made that came from a screenplay he wrote while he was entirely sober, and man does it feel like it. The film is talky, but it's tight at an hour and 28 minutes, and it's so clear-headed and vicious in its rhetoric, devoid of any of the heart that defined Jersey Girl, Clerks 2, and Zack and Miri, seemingly by design. But despite how good it is, it's more important for what it represents. A furious restatement of purpose, and a total abandonment of the traditional Hollywood pipeline. He was back to his independent, plucky DIY roots again. On getting accepted into Sundance, he did what he does best. He attracted attention and created a big press machine. Red State was a film pitched as a direct protest against the homophobic Westboro Baptist Church, so naturally the church came out to protest the premiere. Smith launched his own smirking counter-protest, and the whole thing generated a lot of mainstream buzz. He then claimed he was going to auction his film live in the room after the initial Sundance screening, but instead he took to the stage and sold it to himself for $20, announcing that he would tour the film in a roadshow format, eschewing traditional distribution. Many in the press saw this as a cheap publicity stunt and a bit of a bait and switch. Combine that with his recent crusade against critics and the height of the pithy Gawker AV Club era of film blogs, and this essentially amounted to Smith flipping the Monopoly board, stealing the thimble, and playing a new game of his own design. He retreated to his core audience, the people who would pay $70 to watch the movie and then participate in one of his legendarily candid Q&As. The same people who would pay $5 a month for his podcasts, or go to the Movies pop-up restaurant, or buy his branded Jay and Silent Bob marijuana. It made his path clear. Make a movie for as cheap as you can using a cast of friends and favors, crew the film with folks just starting their careers, tour the movie in a roadshow, release it on a couple of nights at a Fathom screening to say your movie was available to the general public, and then sell the rights to a streamer and make enough money between that and home video to make all of the investors happy. This ethos has defined every subsequent film of his. The one real exception to this is Kilroy Was Here, his recent horror anthology, which is an NFT. Yes, really. I'm pretty certain nobody has seen it. If you have, please let me know. I need to know what this movie actually is. The path of an auteur is limiting. We want to see linear, predictable growth along the lines set by the defining first film. Any deviation from that threatens the auteurist narrative. Most directors have a mix of auteur and journeyman tendencies, though, and some auteurs are defined by genres that are unsustainable or dying. All of that to say, we aren't owed a narrative in a career. We have to be open to a filmmaker changing directions. Pigeonholing directors in narrative or artistic styles in the age of auteur as brand can lead to nightmare scenarios. See any Tim Burton film in the last 20 years where his style and voice have been aggressively flanderized into the loudest, most depressingly banal version of the director we all loved in the 90s. The tragedy of Kevin Smith isn't one of stagnation. It's one of pain and rejection. Every time he tried to show the world his gooey, dorky heart, every time he dared to venture into the overtly sentimental or sweet, there was a backlash that sent him running in the opposite direction. And every time he tried something new stylistically or formally, he got hit on the nose with a rolled-up copy of Variety until he finally gave up, retreated to his niche, and stopped trying to preach to anyone other than the choir. It's been heartening to see Smith bounce back into the overtly sentimental with Jay and Silent Bob reboot. While I may not have loved the film as a whole, it felt like the first step on a road to him reclaiming his voice and reassessing his place in the annals of cinema. The recent trailer for Clerks 3 looks like it's full of heart as well, and it'll be fascinating to see if he manages to successfully use the film as a way to work through his existential crisis following his heart attack in 2019, much in the same way he used Clerks 2 to process his marriage, fatherhood, and the crossroads of his career. My only disappointment is that it won't get a wide theatrical release, with Smith instead opting again for a Fathom event and a subsequent roadshow. Maybe that fear is still there. A fear that even on a shoestring budget, mainstream audiences as a whole are still unwilling to show up to the point where his movies can make money. Maybe it just feels safer to make work for an audience who will always support him no matter what. But if you don't take big risks, you'll never know what you're capable of. And oddly, that seems like the message of Clerks 3. In Clerks 2, Kevin had grown up beyond his avatars, nudging them towards bettering their lives. Maybe this time, it's their turn to do some nudging of their own. Thank thank you all for watching Too Many Tapes. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon to get updates for when I upload videos. Are you excited for Clerks 3? Do you think Kevin Smith can get his mojo back? Let me know in the comments. If you want to help out a small YouTube creator, consider donating $1 or more to my Patreon. Your generous donations let me buy Cop-Out on Blu-ray, a thing I told myself I'd never do. So, thank you for that. Anybody want Cop-Out on Blu-ray? Serious offer. Patrons only, you know where to find me. If you donate $50 or more a month like Cammy, you know, this month, I don't have a fun movie reference or connection. I'm just grateful. Seriously. Or you're Chase Smith, and to both of you, I say thank you. Every month you help make this whole wild project worthwhile, and you have my eternal appreciation. If you donate $20 or more a month, you're NATO Kitsch, the Randall to my Dante, the J to my Silent Bob, and your name gets to be in the credits in an enormous font too. For $10 or more a month, you're Jersey Girl, because you're vastly underrated, I don't spend enough time praising you, and your name gets to be pretty big in the credits as well. And for $5 a month, you're Red State, because you're pretty great, not enough people have seen and appreciated you, and you get early access to my videos. It's like a road show, but online. Thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Too Many Tapes.
Shut up and sit down. I miss my donkey.